The night my father died, they didn't cry, they calculated. My uncle closed the hospital curtain and said, "At least the burden is gone." My mother didn't look at me when she whispered, "You'll never survive without him." And my brother laughed softly, already dividing what little was left, pretending I wasn't standing there. I had always been the failure. The quiet one. The boy who dropped out, who sat in the back of family gatherings while success clinked glasses in the front. At weddings, they introduced me last, if at all. At dinners, my chair was closest to the door. Like I might need to leave quickly if my presence embarrassed them. They spoke about me in the past tense while I was still breathing. After the funeral, they called a family meeting. Papers on the table. Coffee cooling. Smiles sharpened. "Your father's debts are heavy," my uncle said, not meeting my eyes. "We'll handle the assets. There's nothing for you," my brother added, tapping the documents. "You wouldn't know what to do with it anyway." I nodded. I always nodded. Silence had become my language, because words never survived in that room. When I signed the papers, my mother finally looked at me. Not with love, relief. As if she had just erased a mistake. That night, I slept in my car. The city didn't care who I was. That was the first kindness it showed me. I worked nights loading trucks. Days fixing broken phones in a corner shop that smelled of dust and hope. I didn't tell anyone. I learned. I listened. I watched men with power talk too much when they thought no one important was around. Pain became fuel. Humiliation became structure. Every insult replayed itself like a training montage I never asked for. My brother's laugh. My uncle's smirk. My mother's silence. Years passed like that, quiet, invisible. Deliberate. I found an old notebook of my father's one winter night, tucked into a box he'd left me by mistake. Inside were sketches, numbers, ideas he never had the courage to chase. I recognized the handwriting. I recognized the fear between the lines. And suddenly I understood him in a way I never had when he was alive. I built from that notebook slowly. Legally. Relentlessly. I failed again, and again. I slept under desks. I ate standing up. I learned how to walk into rooms where I wasn't wanted and leave with something valuable. I learned when to speak, and when to let silence bleed people dry. By the time my family remembered my name, it was already too late. The invitation arrived on thick white paper, a gala, black tie. Celebrating the grand opening of a new corporate building downtown. My brother was a partner now. My uncle chaired boards. My mother wore pearls and forgiveness like perfume. They didn't expect me to be there. I stood across the street that night, watching cameras flash, watching my family pose beneath lights they believed belonged to them. I adjusted my cufflinks. My name was stitched inside the jacket, where no one else could see it. Yet. Inside, champagne flowed and speeches blurred together. Then the host stepped up, voice confident, smiling at the crowd. "And now," he said, "we welcome the visionary behind this entire project." There was a pause. A delicious one. "Please welcome our founder and principal investor." The lights shifted. The screen behind him lit up. My name appeared first. Then my face. I felt it ripple through the room before I heard it. Gasps, confusion. Chairs scraping back. My brother's glass shattered on the floor. My uncle stood too fast. Blood draining from his face. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth like she might scream or pray. I walked out of the shadows. Each step echoed years of silence. Every eye followed me now. The failure. The mistake. The one who wasn't supposed to survive. I took the microphone. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady. "I won't take much of your time." My brother whispered my name like it was a curse. "I was told I'd never amount to anything." I continued, eyes locked on my family. "That I wasn't built for this world." I smiled, not kind, not cruel, accurate. "This building," I said, gesturing upward, "was designed from an idea people laughed at. Funded with money people thought I'd never earn. Built by hands that were never invited to rooms like this." The room was silent now. No cameras. No whispers. "My family taught me something invaluable," I went on. "They taught me what it feels like to be erased." I handed the microphone back to the host, and turned toward my brother. Our eyes met. "You should read the contracts more carefully," I said quietly. "Especially the parts about control." Security approached him first. Then my uncle. Confusion erupted, Phones buzzed, lawyers whispered. My mother tried to reach me, her voice breaking through the noise. I was trying to protect you, she said, tears finally arriving on schedule. I didn't stop walking. Outside, the city breathed around me. The building rose above, glass catching the night. My name etched into stone at the entrance, not loud, not hidden, permanent. They stood behind the glass now, small and frantic, trapped in a story they no longer controlled. I placed my hand against the cool surface of the wall. For a moment, I thought of my father, of the notebook, of the boy who slept in his car believing the world had already decided his ending. I stepped back and looked up. They had called me the family failure. The next morning, the city didn't recognize me, and yet it obeyed me. My office overlooked streets that had once been endless obstacles. Streets I'd walked at night with nothing but determination and old sneakers. The same streets where my brother had laughed at my failure, now passed under my shadow. Cars honked as I stepped into the elevator, rising to the floor that bore my name. A name they had whispered in contempt, now etched into steel and glass for all to see. I remembered the first time I had truly felt invisible. It was a family dinner my 16th birthday, where my brother had been praised for the scholarships he was earning, while I sat quietly, barely tasting the cake, my hands trembling. That night, the words, "You'll never amount to anything," echoed in my head as I stared at the ceiling of my bedroom. They had thought humiliation would break me. It had only sharpened me. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Eliza, handed me the morning brief. "The investors are restless," she said, but her eyes betrayed excitement. She understood what this was. She had seen what patience and calculated fury could accomplish. I smiled faintly. "Let them be restless," I said. "They'll learn. All of them." By noon, the first call came from my mother. She had learned nothing from her silence, only that I now wielded power she didn't recognize. "Please?" she said, voice wavering. "We need to talk." "I didn't realize." "I know exactly what you didn't realize," I interrupted, calm, precise. "You didn't realize that the boy you dismissed would stand above you. You didn't realize that silence and neglect can make someone unstoppable." I hung up before she could beg further. Mercy, I decided, was not for those who had denied it to me. The week that followed was a carefully orchestrated symphony of control. Contracts I had quietly acquired over years were exercised. Properties once mocked as worthless were suddenly prime investments. A small cafe my uncle had laughed at became a chain of boutique restaurants under my management. My brother's businesses began folding quietly as I bought controlling shares. Each move was precise, invisible to the untrained eye, devastating to the family that had once believed their power unshakable. At night, I walked through the city streets. The same streets where I had wandered homeless, now alive with the lights of businesses I owned, quietly thriving. A part of me still felt the ache of those lonely nights, and I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Pain had been my compass. Betrayal had been my map. I started sending anonymous letters to my family members. My brother received one at his office, a single sheet of paper with a photograph of my first apartment. The one room I had slept in, barely heating in winter. Overlaid with the phrase, "Do you remember where you left me?" He trembled when he read it, though he tried to laugh it off. My uncle's letter contained the blueprints of the building he had laughed at me for considering, now under my control. My mother received photographs of board meetings, where my name was silently dominating decisions she had never been invited to watch. Every letter was a ghost of the past coming alive, a shadow they could not escape. Then came the gala for the opening of my company's newest skyscraper. Invitations were carefully sent to my family, though I knew they would not recognize it as mine at first. They arrived, dressed in finery, their eyes bright with unearned confidence, only to realize as they entered that I was there, present in every projection, in every speech that praised my vision. My brother cornered me, the moment I had anticipated for years. "You can't, this isn't yours!" he spat, rage mixing with fear. I smiled faintly, letting the weight of years settle between us. "It always was," I said. "You just didn't know how to see it." Every word, every gesture I made that night was deliberate. I let them see the contrast between the boy they had scorned and the man who now held all the power. My calm presence contrasted with their panic, my silence sharper than any scream. By the end of the evening, my mother was weeping quietly in a corner, my uncle's face pale and taut, my brother's hands trembling around his drink. Each had been undone not by violence, not by scandal, but by meticulous precision. By the quiet rage that had fueled me since the moment I was called a failure. Weeks later, I walked through my building, the morning sunlight reflecting off the glass walls, my reflection staring back at me. I paused at the lobby, where the receptionists greeted employees by my name. The elevator doors opened to floors where decisions I had made shaped thousands of lives. I remembered the nights of doubt, the hours of grinding, the meals skipped, the loneliness endured. All of it had led to this. Eliza approached with another brief. "They've tried to interfere again," she said, handing over documents that showed attempts by my family to regain influence. "They don't understand, they still think you're weak." I studied the papers carefully. "They never understood me," I said. "They never understood that patience is more deadly than rage. That invisibility is more dangerous than exposure." Later that evening, I received a call from my mother. I can't believe this," she whispered. "I didn't see it coming. I didn't. You've changed everything." "I know," I said quietly, letting the weight of every insult, every dismissal, every cruel word fall between us. "And now you see. This is the price of underestimating someone you believed was nothing." The next day, news outlets covered the opening of my skyscraper. Headlines screamed my name. Features highlighted the meticulous vision behind the project. Analysts debated my strategy. Everyone spoke of the man who had appeared from nowhere to dominate the city skyline and business world overnight. My family watched from their offices, helpless, realizing too late that every slight they had ever delivered had only strengthened me. At night, I stood alone on the top floor, looking out at the city sprawled beneath me. Lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth. I remembered the boy who had walked these streets alone, hungry, ignored, underestimated. I smiled, a small quiet smile that carried the weight of years and the satisfaction of a victory no one could take away. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about anger. It was about patience, strategy, and the relentless transformation of humiliation into power. They had taught me what failure was, and I had learned how to make it eternal. Not theirs, but mine, sculpted into a masterpiece of inevitability. My phone buzzed. Another message from an old investor. Someone who had once doubted me. They wanted to partner, to learn how a failure had become untouchable. I set the phone down. There were new plans to make, new structures to build, new power to wield quietly, invisibly, decisively. And through it all, my family remained in the shadows of my name, staring at the glass and steel that bore my mark, finally understanding that they had never truly had control. The boy they had dismissed had become the man who defined the skyline. The family failure had rewritten the rules. And I had done it without a single misstep, without a single shout, without ever looking back. Because in the end, true revenge doesn't scream. It whispers, it waits. And when it arrives, it leaves the world forever changed. Weeks turned into months. But for me, time had always been measured differently. Every insult, every laugh, every look of disappointment had been stored like currency in a vault only I could access. I moved through the city like a shadow of inevitability. The businesses I acquired grew rapidly, each calculated expansion a chess move I had long envisioned, while my family slept comfortably, unaware of the storm brewing silently beneath their feet. My brother, once so smug and untouchable, now barely recognized the world around him. His offices were stripped of autonomy, his decisions overridden by strategies I had implanted months ago. He called for meetings, tried to assert authority. But every time he spoke, it was clear the boy he had mocked had outgrown him. I let him stumble, let him choke on the very words he had once thrown at me. Humiliation was my craft, and I had mastered it. My mother reached out again, pleading this time. "Please," she said over the phone, voice trembling with fear and desperation. "I just want us to be a family again. I don't know how we can fix this." I smiled, not cruelly, but with a calm precision that sent chills even through my own veins. "The family?" I said softly. "Something you've already defined. You defined it without me. I just made it visible for the first time." Her silence was deafening. I hung up. Mercy, I reminded myself, was reserved for those who deserved it, and she had spent a lifetime teaching me I didn't. At night, I walked alone through the streets I had once wandered with nothing. The city had changed, but it still whispered the same lessons: vigilance, patience, observation. Every corner I turned, every neon sign that reflected off wet asphalt, reminded me of the nights I had slept hungry, watching the world move past me. Those nights had built a foundation stronger than any wealth, any building, any name in lights. They had built me. I began to execute the final phase of my plan. It wasn't flashy. It didn't require confrontation. Instead, it relied on subtle dismantling, quiet, invisible, insidious. My uncle, the man who had once scoffed at my ambition, found himself isolated from every influential board, every political ally, every network he had relied on. Contracts I had placed quietly months ago triggered automatically, transferring his influence into my control without him ever realizing it. Meanwhile, my brother spiraled. His businesses faltered under strategies he couldn't decipher. His employees quietly loyal to me, my vision, my leadership. Every misstep he made was anticipated, every panic perfectly timed to maximize humiliation. I watched the unraveling from a distance, letting my family drown in the consequences of their own arrogance. And then came the night of the unveiling, the most important moment yet. A gala for the launch of my newest venture, an innovation hub that would dominate the tech world. Invitations went out to the city's elite, and, of course, my family. They arrived dressed to impress, expecting glamour, celebration, perhaps even reconciliation. They did not expect confrontation. I arrived last, as always, but not as the invisible boy who had once cowered behind their shadows. I entered with quiet authority, letting the room take notice before I even spoke. Cameras turned instinctively, whispers flitted through the crowd. I was no longer the overlooked son, the dismissed brother, the neglected child. I was the architect of everything in this room. My mother's eyes widened as she saw me. The pearls she had adorned herself with seemed to fade in comparison to the quiet power radiating from me. My uncle froze mid-handshake, his perfectly rehearsed smile faltering. And my brother, he paled. His arrogance, his smug superiority, all evaporated under the weight of the man I had become. I approached the stage calmly, stepping past the receptionists who barely recognized me. The host, realizing I was the real visionary behind the project, nodded subtly. When I took the microphone, I spoke softly, deliberately, each word cutting deeper than any shouting match could. "You may have called me a failure," I began, eyes locking on my family. "You may have laughed at me, ignored me, dismissed me as invisible. But invisibility is powerful. It allows observation. It allows patience. It allows action when no one expects it." The room was silent. Even the media cameras seemed to pause, capturing the transformation of a boy they had never known into a force they could not deny. "I have built everything you thought impossible," I continued. "Your empire, my groundwork, your successes, my insight, the buildings you admired tonight, built from ideas you never had the courage to pursue." I let the words linger, watching as realization struck. My brother's hands shook. My uncle's face lost all color. My mother's eyes filled with tears, not of joy, but of understanding that the child she had written off had surpassed them all. Over the next weeks, I solidified my control. Legal maneuvers, strategic acquisitions, and calculated partnerships ensured that my family could never regain the dominance they had taken for granted. Each morning, I reviewed reports, checking every move, every investment, every public statement. Nothing escaped me. And then the most satisfying moment came unexpectedly. My brother called, desperate and cornered. "Well, we need to talk," he said, voice trembling. "I am listening," I replied calmly, sipping my coffee, my eyes never leaving the skyline outside my window. We don't understand," he said, panic rising. How to observed," I interrupted. "I learned. I endured. I waited, and now? The boy you dismissed has become the man you feared." His silence spoke volumes. Words had failed him because they had failed me for years. But I had not failed. Every insult, every slight, every look of contempt had been cataloged and transformed into strategy. My revenge was complete, not in violence, but in inevitability. They were left powerless. Watching the world change without them, the consequences of their arrogance reflected in every decision I now controlled. My mother called again, tears breaking through her voice. I didn't realize. I didn't know you were capable. I am, I said simply. And now you do? But realization comes too late. The child you underestimated has become the architect of your world. The family failure has written the story, and you are now merely characters within it. I walked to the balcony of my office, the city lights sprawling like a field of stars beneath me. I felt the weight of every struggle, every night of isolation, every moment of silent suffering. They had built me unknowingly, and now I was unstoppable. The revenge was no longer about the past, it was a living, breathing force, visible in every building, every contract, every decision I now controlled. The boy who had been called a failure had become a legend in silence. My name, etched into the skyline, my strategies dominating industries, my family powerless witnesses, all bore testimony to the slow, burning fury of a life underestimated. I leaned against the balcony railing, eyes scanning the city. Somewhere, my brother still struggled to regain balance. My uncle still fumed quietly in his office. My mother still trembled in awe and guilt. But none of them could touch what I had built. None of them could reverse the meticulous calculus of years I had spent transforming humiliation into absolute power. And in that moment, I understood fully. Revenge is not loud. It is not explosive. It is a quiet, inevitable force that reshapes the world around you without warning. It is patience turned into mastery. Humiliation transformed into strategy, pain forged into triumph. The city sprawled endlessly beneath me, glittering like shattered dreams made whole. I had turned invisibility into dominance. I had turned scorn into opportunity. I had turned failure into legend. And as I looked at the world I now commanded, I smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the quiet satisfaction of inevitability. For I was no longer the boy who slept in his car. I was no longer the failure they had mocked. I was the force they had never expected. I had arrived. And nothing, no one could ever erase my name from the skyline again. Months passed, but the world I had built demanded constant vigilance. Success was a living thing, it breathed, shifted, and revealed weaknesses in the hands of the careless. I was never careless. Every move I made, every contract I signed, every alliance I formed was deliberate, unseen by my family, invisible to the people who had once dismissed me. I watched them from above, literally and figuratively. My office overlooked the streets where I had once walked alone, lost, humiliated, ignored. Now, the same streets carried my empire, my investments, my businesses, my vision. Delivery trucks bore my logos, street signs now pointed to businesses I owned, and the city itself seemed to bend subtly under my influence. Every street corner whispered a lesson I had learned long ago: patience, observation, and meticulous action are stronger than rage. The calls from my family became frantic. My brother, always the loudest, was now reduced to whispering desperation. You can't control everything, you can't. I listened silently, allowing him to choke on his fear and disbelief. Each pause, each stammer, was another layer of my revenge cemented. I could hear him scrambling, realizing slowly, painfully, that the boy he had mocked and humiliated had orchestrated the collapse of his influence with precision. The next phase of my plan began quietly. I initiated small, almost invisible campaigns to isolate them, socially and professionally. My uncle, who had once wielded influence like a weapon, suddenly found himself blocked from opportunities he had long taken for granted. Key partners, clients, and associates I had cultivated over the years now refused to engage with him. He sent emails, frantic letters, desperate calls, but by then, it was too late. The chessboard had been set long ago. Every piece moved according to my design. My mother, however, remained the most delicate challenge. She had once been my protector in name only, but now she was consumed with guilt. I allowed her occasional glimpses of my success, not enough to soothe her, only enough to remind her of what she had ignored. When she called, trembling, begging for reconciliation, I spoke with calm authority. Mother, I said, letting my voice resonate softly but firmly, I've waited my whole life for this moment. You may have ignored me, dismissed me, even wished me invisible. But I've taken what you refused to see. The boy you underestimated has become the man who defines everything you thought you controlled. Her sobs were quiet, almost reverent. She had learned too late that love and fear can be intertwined in ways even the closest family members never understand. By now, my empire had grown beyond their imagination. The building that bore my name became a symbol not of arrogance, but of inevitability. The financial world buzzed with admiration and fear. Analysts studied my moves. Competitors attempted to replicate strategies they couldn't comprehend. I had transformed every slight, every humiliation, every whispered insult into a network of influence that now spanned multiple industries. I decided it was time for the ultimate confrontation. Not in violence, not in anger, but in revelation. I called a private dinner, the kind that seemed innocuous, elegant, and refined. My family arrived, expecting civility, perhaps even apology. They did not expect the full magnitude of the transformation I had undergone. The dining room was quiet, except for the soft hum of classical music, a stark contrast to the chaos that was about to unfold. My mother's eyes darted around nervously. My uncle's smile was forced. My brother tried to appear composed, but the tension under his calm facade was unmistakable. I raised a glass, my gaze sweeping over each of them. To family, I said softly, almost tenderly. The family that taught me everything I needed to learn about patience, observation, and resilience. They shifted uncomfortably. I allowed a brief pause before continuing. You taught me what it means to be underestimated. You showed me what it feels like to be invisible. And now you get to witness the results. I gestured, and the lights dimmed slightly. On the wall behind me, screens lit up, showing contracts, business acquisitions, and photographs of the empire I had built while they slept, mocked, and ignored me. My brother's face paled as he realized he had been trapped in a reality he had never controlled. My uncle stammered, trying to comprehend the network of influence I had amassed right under their noses. My mother covered her mouth, overwhelmed by both pride and fear, understanding at last that the child she had dismissed had surpassed them all. This, I said, voice steady and cold, is what happens when you refuse to see someone's potential. This is what happens when you dismiss the quiet ones. This is my revenge, not loud, not angry, but absolute. Over the next several weeks, I finalized every detail. Legal maneuvers ensured their financial and professional isolation was permanent. Every attempt they made to regain control was anticipated and countered. I was no longer just a son, a brother, a family member. They were now the observers of a man who had rewritten the rules entirely. Then came the most subtle, satisfying moment of all. My brother, desperate, confronted me in the office building I now completely controlled. "Yo, you can't take it all," he said, his voice breaking. "I already have," I replied softly, letting the weight of the words sink in. "You just didn't see it coming. You never did. I've transformed every humiliation, every insult, every doubt you planted into the foundation of this empire. You were building me without realizing it." His eyes filled with disbelief. He wanted to argue, to fight, to reclaim some shred of dominance, but every avenue had been closed off. Every bridge he had crossed in arrogance was now under my control. He could only stand there, helpless, staring at the man he had once believed powerless. And finally, my mother came to me, quietly, almost reverently. "I see it now," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't understand before." You see too late," I interrupted softly but firmly. "But perhaps this is the lesson you needed. That neglect and scorn do not destroy. They build. And that what you called failure is now inevitability." I stepped out onto the balcony, the city sprawling endlessly beneath me. Each light was a reminder of nights I had spent planning, building, enduring. Each building bore witness to my transformation. The boy who had once been called a failure was now a force impossible to ignore. The family who had dismissed him could only watch from their powerless corners. Revenge, I understood fully now, is not about destruction. It is about transformation. It is about taking the raw materials of pain, humiliation, and neglect and converting them into unassailable power. It is about ensuring that those who underestimated you see the full measure of what they had dismissed, and that they recognize it too late. The city lights glimmered beneath me, as if applauding the culmination of years of patience and strategy. I had walked through fire, endured scorn, and emerged unbroken. My name was no longer just a word, it was a force, a symbol of resilience, cunning, and ultimate revenge. And in that quiet victory, I allowed myself the smallest smile, a smile not of arrogance, but of satisfaction. The boy they had called a failure had rewritten the narrative, reshaped the world around him, and left those who had doubted him powerless to interfere. I had arrived, and nothing, no one, could ever remove me from the skyline of their lives, or from the city that now obeyed the man I had become. The city never slept, but that night, it felt like it was holding its breath. I stood alone in the penthouse, the highest point of the building that carried my name. The glass walls reflected a man I still sometimes struggled to recognize. Not because of the suit, or the skyline, or the power humming quietly beneath my feet, but because I remembered who I used to be. The boy who waited to be spoken to. The son who learned silence before confidence. The failure they agreed on without discussion. Below me, traffic flowed like veins carrying life through a body that had once rejected me. Every streetlight was a witness. Every building was proof. I hadn't conquered the city through force. I had let it grow around me, accept me, depend on me, until my presence became unavoidable. My phone buzzed once. My brother. I didn't answer immediately. I never did anymore. Control wasn't about denying people, it was about timing. When I finally answered, his voice cracked before he could speak. "They're removing me tomorrow," he said. From everything, I walked closer to the glass. "I know. You planned this?" he whispered. Yes. There was no anger left in him now. Just exhaustion. The kind that comes when someone realizes the fight ended long ago, and they were just late to the battlefield. "You could stop it," he said. "You already proved your point." I closed my eyes for a moment. "My point was never to hurt you," I said calmly. "It was to end the story you wrote about me." Silence. "You erased me first?" I continued. "I just finished what you started." I ended the call before he could respond. The next day, the news broke quietly. No scandals, no drama, just facts, board changes, leadership restructuring, ownership transfers. Analysts called it brilliant. Commentators called it inevitable. No one mentioned revenge. Because the best revenge doesn't look like revenge. It looks like success no one can undo. My mother came to the building in the afternoon. Security called ahead. I allowed her in. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just human. The pearls were gone. The confidence too. She sat across from me, hands folded, eyes trembling between fear and awe. "I see you now," she said. I didn't respond. "I was wrong," she continued. "About you? About everything." I studied her face. The same face that once looked past me at family dinners. The same eyes that avoided mine when decisions were made. "Being wrong," I said finally, "isn't the same as being sorry." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I thought protecting the strong would keep the family safe," she whispered. "And you sacrificed the quiet one," I replied. "That was your choice," she nodded, painfully. "I don't want anything," she said. "Not money, not influence. I just wanted you to know I see what you became." I stood. "You're still looking at it wrong," I said. "I didn't become this. I was built, piece by piece, by every moment you ignored." She reached for my hand. I stepped back. Some doors once closed don't reopen. Not because of anger, but because the room behind them no longer exists. That night, I hosted one final event. No family, no press. Just the people who had believed in me when belief was expensive. The ones who took risks when my name meant nothing. As music played softly and the city glowed below us, someone asked me the question everyone always asked. "How does it feel?" they said, "to finally win?" I thought about it. Winning wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't the moment my name went up on the building. Winning was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Winning was not needing approval anymore. Winning was knowing the story could never be rewritten without my permission. "It feels quiet," I said. Later, long after everyone left, I returned to the edge of the balcony. The wind moved gently across the glass. Somewhere far below, laughter echoed from a street cafe. Life went on. It always had. I thought about the boy in the car. The nights of hunger. The humiliation disguised as advice. They had never known they were training me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old notebook. My father's. The pages were worn now, fragile with age. I flipped to the first page. An unfinished sketch. An idea abandoned too early. I placed it on the table and smiled. The building behind me didn't need my name anymore. The city already knew it. I turned off the lights and walked away, leaving the skyline glowing behind me. Not as a monument to revenge, but as proof of transformation. They called me the family failure. Now, they live in a world shaped by my decisions. And the most painful part for them. I never needed their apology. I never needed their regret. I never needed their love. Because by the time they saw my name on the building, I had already moved beyond them. End.